The wind
Hi,
swept across the
I am
Blackwater
Hercule
marshes with a
Poirot,
mournful
and welcome
sigh,
to my new
bending
mystery
reeds
case.
like thin, shivering fingers reaching toward the grey November sky. At the heart of the vast wetlands, where fog clung stubbornly to the water's surface and the call of distant birds echoed like laments, stood Blackwater Mill, a sprawling estate of weathered stone and ancient timber. Once a thriving mill-turned manor, it now loomed as a relic of grandeur, touched by decay. Inside, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. Shadows clung to the high rafters, and the incessant creak of unseen timbers seemed almost deliberate. Servants whispered of strange occurrences, doors closing by themselves, objects moved from their places, lights flickering though the wiring was sound. The estate had acquired the whispered name the Haunted Mill, though its owner dismissed such talk sharply. On this particular evening, the household had gathered for a small but elegant dinner hosted by Lady Eugenia Blackwater, the stern and dignified matriarch of the estate. The dining room, illuminated by twin chandeliers dripping with crystal, contained an uneasy mélange of guests. Lady Eugenia, her silver hair pinned in severe fashion, her gaze sharp as broken glass. Beatrice Blackwater, her glamorous yet anxious granddaughter, heiress to the estate. Dr. Lionel Graves, the family physician, calm but distracted, as though forever listening for an unseen cue. Mr. Oliver Renwick, a young investor with a charming smile and a tendency to watch the room too closely. The Reverend Samuel Parris, his solemn expression betraying a mind troubled by more than theology. Miss Lydia Moore, Beatrice's companion, quiet, observant, and perhaps too perfectly inconspicuous. Conversation flickered between polite interest and thinly veiled tension. No topic seemed safe for long. Finances, inheritance, the mill's uncertain future, the rumours of haunting, all were touched and then quickly abandoned. It was just past 9 when Lady Eugenia rose from her seat. "If you will excuse me," she announced with cool authority, "I must fetch a ledger from my study. I shall return shortly." The guests murmured assent as she left the dining room, the click of her heels fading down the corridor. Then for several minutes there was only the clink of cutlery and the restless rustle of guests shifting uneasily. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck the quarter hour. Beatrice glanced toward the doorway, frowning. "Grandmother is taking rather long." Before anyone could respond, a scream shattered the stillness, a raw, piercing sound that surged through the dining room like a physical force. Chairs scraped, glasses toppled. Beatrice bolted toward the hallway, Oliver close behind her. The others followed with varying degrees of alarm and hesitation. The corridor was dim, lit only by the pale glow of a single wall sconce. Ahead, Lady Eugenia's study door stood ajar. Beatrice pushed it open. Inside, the study was in disarray, papers scattered across the carpet, a chair overturned. The window rattled violently, though no wind penetrated the room. And at the center of the scene lay Lady Eugenia Blackwater, motionless, crushed against the heavy mahogany desk as though she had fallen or been thrown against it. Her hand clutched at her chest, and her eyes stared upward, wide with the unmistakable terror of her final moments. Beatrice choked on a sob. Dr. Graves knelt beside the body, fingers trembling as he checked for signs of life. He could only shake his head. "She is gone." A cold hush fell. Then Reverend Parris whispered the words no one wished to speak. This is not natural. Not an accident. Not a fall. There is something at work in this house." Oliver scoffed. "A murderer, more likely, Reverend. Not a ghost story." But before another word could be spoken, something strange occurred. The chandelier above them flickered, once, twice, casting harsh shadows that danced across the room. The window slammed shut of its own accord, and the overturned chair, the one no one had touched, shifted only a fraction of an inch across the rug. Miss Lydia stifled a cry. Beatrice whispered, "The haunting! It's begun again!" Oliver exhaled sharply. "Nonsense. We need the police, not a priest." But as the guests stood in fear and confusion, one thing became painfully clear. Lady Eugenia Blackwater had died under deeply suspicious and seemingly impossible circumstances. And far away in London, at that very hour, a note was being slipped beneath the door of a certain Belgian detective's flat in Whitehaven Mansions. A note marked, "Urgent. Blackwater Mill. Request the presence of Hercule Poirot." The journey to Blackwater Mill began before dawn, with Hercule Poirot seated comfortably in a first-class railway compartment, his gloved hands folded neatly over an impeccably pressed coat. The note requesting his presence had been brief but urgent, and though Poirot disliked haste, he disliked unanswered questions even more. As the countryside slipped past the window, rolling fields giving way to the bleak, mist-laden marshland, he felt a familiar stirring of curiosity. A death, sudden and inexplicable, in a house rumoured to be haunted. Such circumstances rarely involved ghosts, but they often involved something far more dangerous. Human nature concealed behind superstition. By late morning, the train drew into Blackwater Station, a lonely platform embraced by damp fog. A young constable awaited him, stiff in posture and pale from lack of sleep. "Monsieur Poirot, I am to escort you to the estate. Inspector Hartridge is already on the scene." Poirot nodded politely, observing the nervous flutter in the constable's hands as they shook his. Fear, whether of the marshes, the mill, or the crime, had rooted itself deeply in those who lived here. As they climbed into the waiting motor car, Poirot smoothed his moustache thoughtfully. "Tell me, mon ami, is the situation as grave as the note suggested?" The constable swallowed hard before speaking. "Lady Eugenia's death has frightened everyone. They say it wasn't natural." Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. When the world cannot understand a thing, it blames the supernatural. But everything has an explanation, provided one looks closely enough. The drive was slow, the narrow road winding through reeds that whispered faintly against the car's windows. When the mill finally appeared, tall, stern, and wreathed in drifting mist, it struck Poirot not as haunted but as brooding, its darkened windows reflecting the murky water below. Even so, he felt a certain heaviness in the air, as though the place resented intrusion. He stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel, and surveyed the building with a measured gaze. "A house with secrets," he murmured. Inspector Hartridge waited at the entrance, a stocky man with tired eyes and a frown deepened by frustration. "Poirot, thank heaven you came. This one is difficult." Poirot inclined his head. "Such cases are often the most rewarding." Hartridge sighed and gestured for him to follow. Inside, the entry hall smelled faintly of old wood, and a sharper scent Poirot immediately recognized, fear lingering like perfume. Servants hovered near the walls, silent and watchful. The inspector led him toward the study where the body had been discovered. "You'll see for yourself. No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle except what you saw in the report. But something feels wrong. Everyone swears no one left the dining room during the time in question, except Lady Eugenia." The study was dim, curtains drawn against the pallid light. Poirot paused in the doorway, taking in each detail with a painter's precision. Papers on the floor, scattered yes, but unevenly. A chair overturned at an angle that suggested deliberate force rather than accidental impact. The heavy desk, polished and formidable, bore a faint smear Poirot examined with his fingertip. Dust disrupted. Someone had leaned heavily there before or after the fall. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing at the window. "You say it slammed shut when the guests arrived." Hartridge nodded. "According to all present." Poirot crouched, inspecting the latch. It was old but sturdy. "Such windows do not close themselves, Inspector." When he stood, he moved with deliberate care around the room, noting every inconsistency. A quill rolled slightly on the desk as he passed, a curious detail too slight to be coincidence. Poirot addressed Hartridge without turning. "And the household? They are all here?" "Yes," the inspector replied. "Shaken, but cooperative. Some more than others." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then let us speak to them. A murder, Inspector, is like a painting. One must examine each stroke before understanding the complete picture." They left the study, and Poirot requested to meet the guests in the drawing-room. Hartridge sent a constable to gather them. When Poirot entered, the atmosphere was suffocating. Beatrice Blackwater stood near the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly enough to whiten her knuckles. Oliver Renwick leaned against a cabinet, outwardly calm, but betraying tension in the rigidity of his jaw. Graves sat in an armchair, weary and withdrawn, while Reverend Paris paced near the window, muttering fragments of scripture. Miss Lydia Moore remained still, her expression unreadable, as though observing from behind an invisible veil. Poirot made a gentle bow to the assembled group. "Mesdames et messieurs, I offer my condolences for your loss. I understand this is a difficult time, yet it is necessary we speak openly." Beatrice's voice trembled as she answered, "Monsieur Poirot, you must believe me. Grandmother had no enemies. She was strict, yes, but she was good. None of us would ever—" Poirot raised a calming hand. "Mademoiselle, I accuse no one. I merely seek clarity." He paced slowly, observing reactions. "Tell me, each of you, what you recall of last night, beginning after Lady Eugenia excused herself from dinner." Their statements came one by one, similar in outline, varied in subtle ways. Poirot filed each discrepancy carefully in his mind. There were glances exchanged, hesitations masked as thoughtfulness, anxieties disguised as grief. Yet something deeper stirred beneath the obvious tensions, a current of secrets threading through the room. When the last voice fell silent, Poirot considered them all, his gaze soft yet penetrating. "Thank you. Your cooperation will help us restore order." As he turned to leave, a sudden gust rattled the hallway, causing Miss Lydia to stiffen visibly. Poirot noticed the flicker of fear in her eyes, a fear separate from grief. He stored that observation away. The house seemed to breathe around them, restless and unsettled, as though waiting for the truth to surface. Poirot touched the polished banister lightly as he walked toward the stairs. "There is more here than meets the eye," he murmured to himself. "Much more." Outside, the marsh winds rose, swirling around the mill's ancient walls. Inside, Poirot prepared to unravel the web of lies concealed beneath the shadow of Blackwater Mill, one delicate thread at a time. Poirot took a measured breath as he ascended the narrow staircase, the faded carpet muffling his steps. The house seemed to exhale around him, its old beams groaning softly as though burdened by the secrets they held. Inspector Hartridge followed close behind, notebook ready, though Poirot suspected the man would write down little. The inspector was still searching for something concrete to cling to, something physical, tangible. But Poirot had already sensed that the truth within Blackwater Mill would demand a subtler approach, one woven through psychology rather than fingerprints or footprints. At the top of the stairs, the corridor stretched in two directions. A cold draught lingered there, stronger than the weather outside should have allowed. Poirot paused, letting the sensation settle across his senses. "You feel it, Inspector. The cold air. It is not merely from a window carelessly left ajar." Hartridge rubbed his arms. "This place is full of draughts." "Old houses often are." Poirot lifted a finger. "Oui, but always one must ask, not why the cold is present, but from where it comes." Before the inspector could reply, footsteps approached from around the corner. Beatrice appeared, her cheeks flushed and her expression troubled. "Monsieur Poirot, may I speak to you? Alone, if possible." Poirot exchanged a brief glance with Hartridge, then nodded. "Of course, mademoiselle." The inspector hesitated, then stepped back a few paces, lingering within earshot, but discreetly turning away. Beatrice clasped her hands tightly before her. "I did not want to say this downstairs. The others would only dismiss it. But last week, the night before grandmother fell ill, she told me she was hearing things. Footsteps in the corridors at night. Whispers outside her study door. I thought she was only tired, perhaps stressed by the estate's finances." She swallowed. "But now I cannot help but wonder if someone meant to frighten her." "Or worse." Poirot lowered his head slightly, his gaze softening. "You believe she was afraid?" "Yes," Beatrice replied quickly. "And she was not a woman easily frightened. Someone was tormenting her." Poirot tapped one finger lightly against his sleeve. "Tell me, did Lady Eugenia confide in anyone else? A friend? A doctor, perhaps?" Beatrice shook her head. "Only Dr. Graves, I suppose. But he always told her the same thing he told me, that stress can manifest in strange ways." A small tremor crossed her voice at the mention of the doctor. Poirot filed that observation away with the precision of a man arranging chess pieces. "Mademoiselle, your grandmother's study, was it a room she used frequently?" "Every evening," Beatrice answered. "She was reviewing the mill's records. There have been complications, disagreements about the future of the estate." Her gaze drifted downward. "Some want it sold, some want it restored. Others want it demolished entirely." "Ah," Poirot murmured softly. "A property of great value, yet surrounded by conflict. Such things create motives, do they not?" Beatrice's breathing quickened with unease. "Are you saying one of us—" Poirot held up a hand. "No, I say nothing yet, but conflict is the seed from which a crime may grow." From downstairs came the sudden slam of a door, followed by raised voices, Oliver's sharp baritone, and Reverend Paris's tense, wavering tone. Beatrice startled at the sound, and Poirot gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go, mademoiselle. Join the others. I shall speak with you again." She nodded and hurried off. Poirot descended the stairs, Hartridge at his side, and entered the parlour where Oliver and the Reverend stood face to face in heated dispute. Oliver broke off when he saw Poirot. "Perhaps you can settle this, monsieur. Reverend Paris seems determined to insist this tragedy is some divine punishment." The Reverend's trembling hands clutched a leather Bible to his chest. "I did not say divine punishment. I said unnatural forces may be at work. There have been signs, dark omens." "Utter nonsense," Oliver snapped. Poirot raised a hand, instantly quieting the room. "Messieurs, arguments will not assist us. Instead, let us consider facts." He turned to the Reverend. "You believe something beyond the ordinary is involved?" The Reverend hesitated, then nodded. "I do. Twice this week I heard chanting late at night, coming from near the old mill tower, and last night, barely an hour before dinner, The chapel bell rang, though the rope was untouched. Oliver rolled his eyes. If you ask me, someone is playing tricks to scare the household. Poirot took a slow step forward. Perhaps these events serve another purpose, to confuse, to distract, or to hide a truth less dramatic, but far more deliberate. The inspector frowned. What truth? Poirot glanced at him. That, my friend, is what we must uncover. He motioned for the Reverend. You will show me the tower later. For now, I must speak with each person privately. He turned to Oliver. And you, Monsieur Renwick, you were quick to dismiss the Reverend's concerns. Why? Oliver stiffened. Because fear makes people irrational, and irrational people make baseless accusations. Poirot looked him over carefully. Or because such tales complicate matters you prefer kept simple? Oliver's jaw tightened, but before he could reply, Dr. Graves entered the room. His usually steady demeanour seemed shaken, and a faint sheen of sweat glistened on his brow. Inspector, may I speak with you? It concerns Lady Eugenia's health. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Her health, Doctor? Or her state of mind? Graves looked taken aback. Both, perhaps, but I would prefer a private word. Hartridge nodded and followed the doctor out. Poirot, however, watched Graves closely as he left, his hurried steps, his avoidance of eye contact. Several threads were beginning to twist together, though the pattern remained elusive. The house groaned again, a lingering moan through the rafters. Poirot felt the chill return, sliding along the walls like an unseen presence. Fear, he murmured softly, is the most dangerous accomplice of all, and someone here knows precisely how to use it. With calm steps, he turned toward the study once more. Every lie, every secret, every contradiction, they were beginning to surface. And soon, the little grey cells would illuminate what the shadows of Blackwater Mill sought so desperately to hide. Poirot paused outside Lady Eugenia's study once more, letting his gaze sweep over the corridor with renewed attention. The quarrel downstairs, the trembling fear in Beatrice's voice, the Reverend's ominous claims, the doctor's desire for secrecy, each detail pressed against the others like mismatched puzzle pieces waiting for the correct alignment. He entered the study slowly, running a fingertip along the edge of the heavy desk where the smear in the dust had caught his interest earlier. The room felt colder than before, not merely chilly, but touched by a subtle, unnatural draught that seeped from unseen cracks. He searched the walls, the curtains, the skirting, anywhere a draught might enter, and found nothing obvious, but something remained out of balance, an element wrong in its very placement. He crouched to the floor again, studying the scattered papers. A pattern emerged. Most had fallen outward from the desk, but a few near the window pointed inward, as though caught by a contrary force, perhaps a gust, perhaps a hurried hand. Poirot leaned closer and detected a faint imprint on one sheet, a partial shoe mark, small, likely from a woman's heel. He did not disturb it. Instead, he allowed his mind to turn the observation over like a coin glinting in lamplight. When he rose, the floor creaked softly, an ordinary sound in an old house, but one that drew his attention nonetheless. He tapped the boards lightly with his cane, hollow, only one portion. He crouched again, applying slight pressure. The board shifted almost imperceptibly. This house, he murmured, offers too many secrets to too many hands. A sudden knock interrupted his thoughts. Miss Lydia Moore stood at the threshold, her eyes wide but steady, as though she had fought back the instinct to flee. "Monsieur Poirot, may I come in?" He gestured gently. "But of course, mademoiselle." She stepped inside like a person entering sacred ground, careful and slow. I wish to speak with you privately. I do not know if it is important, but—" She hesitated, fingers twisting together. Poirot folded his hands before him. "Mademoiselle, in such matters, even the smallest detail may carry great significance." Lydia took a breath. "Last night, during dinner, I noticed something strange. Lady Eugenia seemed unsettled before she excused herself. She kept glancing toward Reverend Paris as though expecting him to speak. When he remained silent, she grew tense, frightened even." Poirot considered this. "You believe she feared the Reverend?" "No," Lydia replied quickly. "Not him. Rather, something she thought he knew." She lowered her voice. "And there is another thing. I did not hear a scream." Poirot tilted his head. "Pardon, mademoiselle?" "I was nearest the kitchen door at the time. Everyone else claims they heard a
scream, but I heard nothing, not a sound." Poirot's gaze sharpened with interest. "That is most intriguing." Footsteps sounded in the hall before he could continue. Oliver appeared, his expression a mixture of indignation and forced calm. "Am I interrupting?" Poirot responded with mild politeness. "Not at all, monsieur. What brings you here?" "Inspector Hartridge asked me to fetch you. Dr. Graves is ready to speak." Poirot inclined his head, though his eyes lingered on Lydia for a fraction longer. She offered a small nod, then slipped out quietly. Oliver watched her go, his jaw tight. Poirot observed him with that gentle scrutiny few noticed until it was too late. "You are troubled, Monsieur Renwick?" Oliver scoffed. "Everyone here is troubled." "But for different reasons," Poirot replied softly. He followed Oliver down the staircase, where the inspector and Dr. Graves stood near the entrance to a narrow side hall. The doctor looked visibly shaken, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their tremor. Poirot approached him calmly. "Doctor, you wish to speak with us?" Graves nodded. Yes, Lady Eugenia had been complaining of chest pains recently. I prescribed rest, advised her to reduce her workload. She ignored my instructions entirely." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Chest pains, you say? Yet she appeared healthy enough to host dinner last night." "She was stubborn," Graves replied, "determined to maintain the appearance of strength. But in truth, her heart was failing. I believe she collapsed from the strain." Poirot studied him quietly. "Doctor, you examined the body. Did nothing strike you as inconsistent with such a collapse?" Graves hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the inspector. "There were bruises," he admitted reluctantly, "on her arm and shoulder, but she could have struck the desk when she fell." Poirot's voice remained gentle. "And the mark on her wrist? Circular, faint, but present." Graves stiffened, surprised. "You noticed that?" "I notice many things." Graves swallowed hard. "It could be from a bracelet. She often wore one." Poirot nodded slowly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps someone seized her wrist in her final moments." Graves' face paled, but he said nothing. The inspector interjected. "Poirot, you're not suggesting—" "I suggest nothing yet, Inspector," Poirot replied. "I merely observe." He turned back to Graves. "Doctor, did Lady Eugenia confide in you regarding any threats, any fears? Anything that weighed upon her mind beyond her health?" The doctor shook his head quickly. Too quickly. "No, nothing of the sort." Poirot sensed the lie beneath the surface like a ripple beneath still water, but he did not press further. Instead, he stepped back, hands behind him, his gaze drifting toward the side hall. "What is there?" Hartridge cleared his throat. "Servants' quarters and Lady Eugenia's private
archive room. No reason to believe anything relevant is inside." Poirot moved toward it anyway. On the contrary, a woman reviewing documents nightly and fearing shadows would keep her secrets close, but not in the obvious place. He opened the door. Dust floated in the cold, dim passage. The air smelled of paper, dampness, and the lingering scent of lavender, the perfume Lady Eugenia favoured. Poirot walked slowly, each step deliberate, until he reached a locked door at the end. The key still hung from the lock. He turned it. Inside, shelves sagged under ledgers, letters, and financial documents. And on the centre table lay a single folder, its papers spread wide as though examined in haste. Poirot leaned over them. At the top page, unmistakable in its bold ink, was the beginning of something that tightened every thread of uncertainty into sharp focus. A revised will, signed but never witnessed. Poirot exhaled softly. Ah, so the motive begins to take form. Poirot stood perfectly still as he examined the revised will, his fingertips barely grazing the parchment as though afraid to disturb the lingering intentions of the dead woman. The ink was fresh. He could see where the strokes darkened at the end of each line, the subtle pooling that spoke of a pen used recently. And yet the document lacked the essential signatures of witnesses. It was unfinished, unvalidated, and therefore dangerous. A will in transition posed a threat to those who benefited from the old arrangement, and to those whose fortunes would be transformed under the new one. Inspector Hartridge stepped closer, frowning as he glanced over Poirot's shoulder. So she was planning changes. That in itself isn't a crime. Poirot shook his head gently. Non, mon ami, but such changes create tension. Imagine, Inspector, someone learns the contents of this new will and fears the consequences. Or perhaps someone encouraged her to revise it, and then the good lady changed her mind. He placed a finger lightly on the topmost page. Motives multiply where money and legacy intertwine. He turned the next sheet, revealing scribbled notes in Lady Eugenia's severe hand, percentages, allocations, names. Poirot noted Oliver Renwick's name more than once, circled in ink. Curious. Also present were annotations regarding the mill, restoration plans, potential investors, and a letter draft terminating a particular financial agreement. Poirot scanned the signature line. It was addressed to Oliver. Hartridge exhaled sharply. This could make him the prime suspect. Poirot gave a small shrug. Perhaps, or perhaps the lady was preparing to sever ties with him, and he knew nothing of it. His gaze sharpened. Or perhaps he knew everything. He closed the folder carefully and moved through the archive room, his eyes sweeping across the shelves. Several sections were immaculate, with every ledger arranged by date. Others showed signs of recent disturbance. He traced one hand along a row of older volumes, stopping where dust had been shifted by another's touch. A gap, thin but deliberate, marked a missing book. Poirot tapped the empty space. One item is absent. Something Lady Eugenia kept here was removed recently. Hartridge leaned in. Any idea what it was? Poirot shrugged lightly. Not yet, but the thief knew exactly where to look. As they stepped out of the archive room, Oliver Renwick appeared in the corridor, clearly searching for them. His expression tightened at the sight of Poirot holding the folder containing the revised will. "What's that?" he demanded, then attempted a more controlled tone. "If it concerns the mill's finances, I can help clarify." Poirot closed the folder with a soft click. "Monsieur Renwick, clarity is most welcome, but your eagerness is, how do you say, poorly timed." Oliver's jaw flexed. "I don't appreciate the implication." Poirot offered a polite smile. "Neither do I appreciate suspicion in advance of inquiry. It is unbecoming." Before Oliver could respond, Dr. Graves approached from behind. his face nearly as pale as the papers now tucked under Poirot's arm. "Inspector, I must speak with you again. Something urgent has come to my attention." Hartridge sighed, irritation creeping in. "Out with it, then." The doctor hesitated until Poirot turned his full attention upon him. "It's Beatrice," Graves said finally. "Her grandmother confided something to me, strictly medical, yes, but now I fear it may be relevant. Lady Eugenia feared she was being poisoned." Oliver exhaled an incredulous laugh. "Poisoned? That seems extreme." But Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. "Ah, now the light begins to illuminate the shadows." Graves lifted his hands. "She had no proof, only suspicions. She believed someone tampered with her tea on 2 separate occasions. I examined her and found nothing concrete to support it, but her anxiety was real." "Why did you not mention this earlier?" Hartridge demanded. "Because I thought it unrelated," Graves insisted. "She suffered from stress, insomnia. Her imagination could have contributed to the notion." Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but penetrating. "Doctor, whether her fear was justified or imagined, it is significant. A frightened woman does not confront her household openly. She hides things, she locks away documents, she prepares a new will." His eyes flicked to the folder again. "And she isolates herself in her study, even during dinner." Oliver rubbed his temple. "This is spiraling into madness. Ghosts, poison, wills, it's all speculation." Poirot faced him calmly. "On the contrary, it is structure. We are constructing the framework of truth." Then he added with pointed gentleness, "You seem distressed, Monsieur Renwick." Oliver stiffened. Anyone would be under these circumstances. Poirot allowed the remark to pass without challenge. Instead, he turned toward the staircase where Beatrice appeared once more, her face pale, her shoulders trembling. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "there's something you must see." They followed her to her grandmother's bedroom, a somber chamber lined with dark wood and heavy drapery. Beatrice pointed to the vanity. It wasn't here before." On the surface lay a small velvet pouch torn open. Inside were crushed remnants of what appeared to be dried flowers or herbs. Poirot lifted a small pinch between 2 fingers, inhaling faintly. Angelica root, valerian, and something more bitter. Dr. Graves leaned closer, startled. "Those could induce dizziness or disorientation if taken in strong doses." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "A subtle poison, not to kill but to confuse." Beatrice clasped her hands. "Grandmother kept her tea blends here. Someone could have mixed it in." Poirot replaced the crushed herbs thoughtfully. "Or perhaps it was she herself who prepared it, believing it would calm her nerves. But I do not think so. The lady was precise, disciplined. Her mixtures would never be so chaotic." Hartridge questioned Beatrice gently. "Do you know who last brought tea to your grandmother?" She hesitated. "Lydia, I think. She always prepared the bedtime teas." Poirot's eyes flickered with interest, but not accusation. "We must speak with her again." But as he turned toward the door, a deep, echoing creak reverberated through the ceiling, followed by a heavy thud somewhere above them. Beatrice gasped. Hartridge tensed. Dr. Graves paled. Poirot remained motionless for 1 heartbeat, then murmured, "Ah, the house speaks again." And without waiting for permission, he began ascending the narrow staircase leading to the mill's uppermost floor, where secrets waited in the dust. The staircase groaned beneath Poirot's careful steps, each creak echoing into the dimness above. A single narrow window cast a slice of pale afternoon light across the upper landing, illuminating floating dust motes like drifting snow. Hartridge followed close behind, muttering under his breath about unstable floors and unsafe architecture, but Poirot paid him no mind. His attention was fixed on the faint thud they had all heard, neither loud enough to be a collapse, nor soft enough to dismiss as the settling of old wood. It had been deliberate, a sound made by something or someone moving overhead. At the top of the stairs, a long corridor stretched into shadow. The air was colder here, carrying a faint, metallic scent. Poirot paused, letting the stillness guide him. "Which rooms are above Lady Eugenia's?" he asked quietly. Hartridge pointed down the hall. 2 unused bedrooms, some old storage spaces, and the entrance to the mill tower. "No one comes up here?" Poirot gave a soft hum. When a place is avoided by all, it becomes most desirable to someone who wishes not to be seen. He moved forward, testing each door with delicate precision. The first 2 rooms were empty, shrouded in dust and disuse, but as he approached the 3rd door, a narrow archway leading to a short passage, Poirot slowed, lifting his cane to tap the floorboards. The hollow sound echoed faintly, different from the boards below. "This space," he murmured, "is not as empty as it appears." Hartridge frowned. "It's just the tower passage, nothing up there except the old machinery." Poirot's hand hovered before the doorknob. "Yet it seems someone has passed through recently." He pointed at the faint track of disturbed dust on the floor, the imprint of a shoe dragged along the edge. Too small for a man's boot, too narrow even for Oliver. Poirot glanced back. A lady, perhaps, or a young person, but someone careful, not running or fleeing, merely creeping. Hartridge swallowed visibly. "You think someone is hiding up there?" Poirot merely raised one brow. "We shall discover if the tower holds a guest." He pushed the door open with slow precision. The hinges squealed softly, revealing a tight passage curling upward like the inside of a shell. The air grew colder still, carrying a whisper of wind that did not belong in a sealed house. Poirot ascended, cane tapping rhythmically beside his steps. Halfway up, a sudden metallic rattle echoed from above, sharp, quick, and unmistakably human. Hartridge stiffened. "Someone's up there." Poirot did not increase his pace. "If they wished to attack us, Inspector, they would not have announced their presence." He reached the top landing, emerging into the tower room, round, stone-walled, and filled with long defunct mill equipment. Wooden beams sagged overhead, and a ladder led up to the bell mechanism. The air smelled of rust and mildew, but it was not empty. In the corner, half concealed behind an old gear assembly, sat a small trunk, its lid slightly ajar. Poirot approached, bending gracefully to lift it. Inside lay a collection of items, torn scraps of paper bearing Lady Eugenia's handwriting, an empty vial, a small dark bottle, and a thin leather-bound diary. Hartridge blinked. "What in blazes? Whose things are these?" Poirot examined the bottle first. A tincture, something herbal, perhaps harmless, or perhaps not. He turned it and slowly, noting the residue near the rim. "And the diary, unks, this is not Lady Eugenia's. The hand is different." He flipped it open. Neat, delicate writing filled the pages, entries marked over the last 2 months. He read only a few lines before closing it again, thoughtful. He had no time to speak before footsteps echoed below, the hurried, frantic rhythm of someone running up the stairs. Poirot and Hartridge turned just as Lydia Moore burst into the tower room, her breath coming in sharp, frightened gasps. "Monsieur Poirot, please, you mustn't be here," she cried, clutching the railing. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "On the contrary, mademoiselle, this is precisely where I must be." Lydia took a step back, her face pale as snow. "You don't understand. Those things, those papers, they aren't mine. I only found them. I was trying to help Lady Eugenia." Poirot approached her gently, offering a calm smile. "Then you must tell me everything. Secrets in darkness are dangerous. Shared in the light, they become harmless." Lydia's composure crumbled. Tears welled, and she pressed a hand against her mouth. "I didn't want anyone to know I had been coming up here. Lady Eugenia asked me to keep watch, to listen for anything unusual. She said she heard footsteps at night, voices outside her study. She thought someone was spying on her." Poirot nodded slowly. "And did you find such a person?" Lydia shook her head, trembling. "No, but I found these." She gestured weakly toward the trunk. "They were hidden behind the gears. Lady Eugenia told me not to tell Beatrice or Dr. Graves or anyone. She feared the family was turning against her. I don't know why." Hartridge crossed his arms. "And the diary? Whose is it?" Lydia hesitated. I'm not certain, but I think it might be Beatrice's." Poirot watched her carefully, his mind already several steps ahead. "And why would Mademoiselle Beatrice hide her diary here?" Lydia looked down. "She wouldn't. That's the point. Someone took it." Poirot turned the diary in his hand. "A private record, taken from its owner, used perhaps to read her thoughts, her feelings, her intentions." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Or to learn what she knew, or suspected." Before Lydia could reply, the tower groaned under a sudden gust. Dust cascaded from the beams overhead. Hartridge swore softly. "This place is falling apart." But Poirot did not look upward. His attention was on the stairs. Someone else was coming, quietly, steadily. He motioned for silence. A shadow formed on the lower step. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "At last," he murmured, "the spider returns to the center of its web." The shadow on the stairs paused only a moment before the figure emerged fully into view, stepping into the dim roundness of the tower room. Beatrice Blackwater stood framed by the archway, her breath shallow, her eyes darting first to Poirot, then to Lydia, then to the open trunk at their feet. Whatever emotion flickered in her gaze, fear, guilt, surprise, vanished behind a mask of composed distress as she drew herself upright. "I heard voices," she said, her tone strained but controlled. "The others told me you'd come up here. I worried something was wrong." Poirot inclined his head, though his eyes missed nothing. "You came alone?" he asked softly. "Yes," she answered. "Everyone downstairs is unsettled. I wished to know if you'd found anything." Her gaze drifted again toward the diaries in Poirot's hand. "What is that?" He held it delicately between thumb and forefinger. "A private account of someone's thoughts. Mademoiselle Lydia believes it may be yours." The flicker in Beatrice's eyes returned, sharper this time, though she remained outwardly composed. "If it is, I want it back, immediately." Poirot offered her a gentle smile. "Ah, but you have not yet confirmed whether it is indeed yours." She hesitated. Too long. He saw the calculation behind her stillness. A truth weighed. A lie considered. At last, she exhaled sharply. "Very well, it is mine. Someone must have stolen it from my room. I never brought it here." Her voice trembled with indignation, but Poirot heard the underlying note of fear. "And these?" he asked, motioning toward the scraps of Lady Eugenia's handwriting and the empty vial in the trunk. Beatrice swallowed. "I have never seen them before." Lydia stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Beatrice, I swear I didn't think it was yours at first." "Enough!" Beatrice snapped, her facade cracking for the first time. "You had no right to touch it. None of this is your concern." Lydia recoiled, shrinking back as though struck. Poirot lifted a calming hand. Mademoiselle Beatrice, recriminations will lead us nowhere. The question is not who found the diary, but who wished it hidden, and why. Hartridge, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, suddenly spoke. Poirot, this is turning into a circus. A stolen diary and some herbs aren't proof of murder. Poirot did not look at him. His gaze remained locked on Beatrice. Tell me, mademoiselle, did your grandmother confide anything to you in her final days? Anything she feared? Beatrice's eyes glossed with tears she had been holding at bay. She was different, she whispered. Not frightened exactly, but watchful. She kept her door locked at night. She said the house felt wrong. And did she mention any person by name? Poirot asked. Anyone she mistrusted? The hesitation was so slight it would have passed unnoticed by anyone else, but not Poirot. Dr. Graves, she said at last. She told me he was hiding something. She didn't say what. Lydia gasped. But Dr. Graves has been nothing but helpful. Beatrice's voice sharpened. You didn't know her like I did. When she mistrusted someone, she never did so lightly. Poirot absorbed this in silence, then bent to close the trunk. As he did, the faint metallic smell that had lingered in the air became sharper. He inhaled subtly. Not rust, not mildew. It was the faint, unmistakable scent of blood. He froze. The others waited, puzzled. Poirot tapped the floor softly with his cane, tracing the scent to the wall behind the gear assembly. Dust clung to the stone, except for a thin, narrow streak leading downward, disturbed recently. He pressed his fingertips lightly against the seam between two stones. One shifted, under his touch. A hidden panel, Poirot murmured. How interesting. Hartridge stepped forward, startled. You're joking. But the stone moved again, and with a soft, grinding noise, a narrow recess opened. Inside lay a folded cloth, dark, stiff, and unmistakably stained. Lydia covered her mouth. Beatrice stumbled backward. Hartridge swore under his breath. Poirot removed the cloth carefully, revealing a pair of gloves, fine leather, delicate in shape, clearly belonging to a woman. The fingertips were smeared with dried brownish red. Blood, Poirot said quietly. Not old, not fresh, perhaps from the night of the tragedy. Beatrice's voice quavered. Those aren't mine. Lydia looked petrified. Nor mine. Poirot lifted the gloves to the light. They belonged to someone with slender hands, someone who wished to hide them quickly, someone who had access to this tower. His eyes drifted, only briefly, toward Lydia. She flinched. No, I swear, I didn't. Calm yourself, mademoiselle, Poirot said firmly. I accuse no one yet, but the person who hid these was not panicked. They placed them with intention, knowing few would ever search here. Hartridge stepped forward. Poirot, we must take these downstairs. We must. A sudden crash from below cut him off, shattering glass, followed by a startled cry. Beatrice gasped. That came from the study. Poirot turned immediately. Come, quickly. They descended the narrow steps, Lydia clinging to the railing, Beatrice rushing ahead despite Hartridge's warnings. Poirot reached the lower landing just as Oliver Renwick burst out of the study, his usually composed face contorted with fury. He's gone, Oliver shouted. The Dr. Graves, he jumped out the window. Beatrice froze mid-step. What? Why? Oliver pointed to the shattered study window. He was rifling through Lady Eugenia's desk when I walked in. When he saw me, he panicked. He fled. Poirot moved past Oliver into the study. Papers lay strewn across the floor, different from before. The drawer containing the financial documents hung open. And one envelope was conspicuously missing. Hartridge stormed in. "He ran! That's as good as a confession." Poirot crouched near the broken window frame, touching a shard of glass. "No, Inspector. A guilty man does not flee into marshland without a plan. This was impulse, desperation." He glanced toward the trees beyond the yard, branches swaying violently. "Someone has driven him to fear." Beatrice trembled. "But why would he steal anything?" Poirot rose slowly, turning toward them all. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with certainty. "Because, mes amis, he has realized that the noose tightening around this household may soon encircle his own neck." The study fell into a taut, breathless silence after Poirot's quiet declaration. Outside the shattered window, the wind tore through, the trees with a ferocity that seemed almost intentional, as though the marsh itself sought to swallow Dr. Graves whole. Hartridge barked orders to the constables, sending 2 of them into the yard to search the grounds, but Poirot raised a hand, stopping the inspector before he followed. "No, Inspector, you will not catch him tonight. The marshes are treacherous, and a frightened man will run without thought. He may find refuge or he may find doom. In either case, it will not be by your hand." Hartridge swore under his breath, but relented. Oliver brushed shards of glass from his sleeve, clearly shaken. I knew something was off about him. The way he avoided questions, the way he insisted Lady Eugenia's fears were just nerves. He was hiding something. Poirot regarded Oliver with a soft, probing gaze. "And you, monsieur? Have you hidden anything?" Oliver stiffened. "Of course not." Poirot offered a faint smile. "Then we shall proceed with clarity." Beatrice hovered near the desk, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, what could he have taken? What was in that envelope?" Poirot approached the desk, examining the disturbed drawers. Something he feared might incriminate him, or something he believed another intended to use against him. He straightened slowly, hands clasped behind his back. But whatever it was, its absence tells us much. Lydia stood in the doorway, hands clasped, eyes glossy with fear. She watched Poirot as though waiting for him to name a culprit, to end the nightmare. Instead, he turned to her with gentle gravity. "Mademoiselle Lydia, did Lady Eugenia ever mention the doctor in relation to the fears she confided in you?" Lydia hesitated, chewing her lip. She said he was keeping secrets, that he was distant. But she didn't accuse him outright. She only said she no longer trusted his counsel. Poirot nodded. And trust, once lost, cast suspicion everywhere. Hartridge snapped the pencil between his fingers. "Poirot, the man fled. That is enough to hold him responsible." Poirot tilted his head, as if considering. "It is enough to call him frightened. But is he frightened because he killed, or because he believes someone is framing him?" Oliver scoffed. "That's absurd. Who would frame the doctor?" Poirot did not answer. Instead, he turned toward the broken window. The wind whipped icy air into the room, scattering loose papers. He shut the shutters with deliberate care, the wood groaning against the cold. "We must not rush. A crime such as this is woven with intention. The victim feared poison, feared shadows, feared betrayal. She prepared a new will, yet told no one, and someone watched her closely, close enough to know her steps, her habits, her weaknesses." Beatrice hugged her arms. "Grandmother told me. She believed the house was no longer safe. I thought she meant the marsh, the storms. But now..." Her voice cracked. "Now, I wonder if she meant us." Poirot approached her with remarkable gentleness. "You loved her deeply, mademoiselle, and she trusted you. But she also shielded you. This tells us she believed danger came from someone who might also gain your sympathy or your forgiveness." Beatrice blinked. stunned. "But that could be anyone here?" "Just so," Poirot said softly. "The circle narrows not through accusation, but through understanding." Hartridge paced near the hearth. "So what now? Do we question everyone again? Search the house?" Poirot shook his head. "No, we wait for the Marsh to speak." Oliver frowned. "What does that mean?" Poirot stepped past him, moving toward the hall. "A man fleeing with secrets will try to hide them before he hides himself. We must allow him time to attempt it. Meanwhile, we continue to follow the threads left in this house." He motioned for them to follow as he left the study, leading them down the corridor toward the old parlour. The room was dim, lit only by a single gas lamp flickering near the mantel. Its shadows crawled along the walls. Poirot approached the fireplace, leaning slightly to peer at the ashes. "Someone has burned documents recently, very recently." He pressed the back of his hand close to the embers. "Still warm." Oliver shifted uneasily. "Who would—" "Someone who wished to erase evidence before the doctor found it," Poirot said quietly. "Or after." He sifted through the ash with a silver poker, unearthing a partially charred scrap. Hartridge moved closer with a lantern. The fragment revealed only the edge of a signature, Lady Eugenia's, and part of a sentence, "Trust no one until I have—" The rest was lost. Lydia shuddered. It's like she knew something terrible was coming. Poirot tapped the poker gently against the hearth. Or she knew someone was deceiving her, and she sought to protect her assets, her legacy, and perhaps her granddaughter. Beatrice looked down, tears threatening again. "If she was trying to protect me, why say nothing?" "Ah," Poirot murmured. "But she did, in her actions. The locked doors, the hidden documents, the changes to her will. A woman of her discipline does not act from vague dread. She acts from certainty." He stepped back from the hearth, his gaze sweeping the room. This fire was lit after her death. Someone in this household has tried to erase her words, and someone else, Dr. Graves, feared discovery enough to flee. Hartridge frowned. "So which one is it, Poirot? The killer or the scapegoat?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps both, or perhaps neither, but I promise you this: the truth is closer than any of you believe." A sudden gust rattled the windows violently, as though the marsh itself beat its fists against the glass. Oliver flinched. Lydia let out a soft cry. Poirot, however, stepped toward the sound, his expression sharpening with sudden clarity. "There is one place," he said quietly, "where the truth must lie. Lady Eugenia did not trust anyone enough to speak, but she trusted her habits, her routines, and she was a woman who wrote everything down." Beatrice whispered, "Her journals. They're missing." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. Someone has taken them, and I believe I now know where they are hidden." The house creaked as though reacting, but Poirot smiled faintly. "Come, mes amis, the time for shadows is ending." The corridor felt even colder as Poirot led them away from the parlour, his steps precise, his posture straight as a metronome. The house was stirring. He could feel it, a subtle vibration in the floorboards, the hush of wind finding its way through cracks like a breath held too long. Beatrice followed close behind, her anxiety radiating like heat. Lydia lingered several paces back, as though afraid to move too quickly. Oliver remained tense, hands shoved in his pockets, while Hartridge muttered darkly under his breath. Poirot stopped at the base of the main staircase, turning sharply. "We go to Lady Eugenia's private quarters once more," he announced softly. "There is something there we have overlooked." Beatrice paled. "Her room? We already searched it." Poirot shook his head. "Non, mademoiselle." "You looked, but searching requires method." He tapped his temple. "And the use of the little grey cells." They climbed in near silence. When they reached the landing, Poirot paused at the door to Lady Eugenia's bedroom. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, as though the room were holding its breath. He opened the door quietly and stepped inside with a reverence that bordered on ritual. The room remained just as they had left it earlier, the draped windows, the cold fireplace, the vanity with its disordered pouch of crushed herbs. But Poirot moved immediately toward the writing desk in the far corner, a modest piece half concealed beneath a tapestry. Beatrice blinked in surprise. That desk was not important. Grandmother rarely used it. "On the contrary," Poirot murmured, kneeling to inspect the drawers. "A private woman uses a private desk. The other was for the household, the estate, the mill." He tugged gently at the top drawer. It slid open easily, revealing only stationery. The second drawer resisted tightly, as though something pressed against it from the inside. Poirot tapped the lock. "Inspector, if you would." Hartridge stepped forward, inserting a thin tool from his pocket and flicking the latch. The drawer creaked open, and there, nestled carefully beneath folded linens, lay a slim, leather-bound book, ink worn along the spine from years of handling. Beatrice gasped. "Her journal." Poirot lifted it gently, brushing dust from the cover. "One of them, but not all. Lady Eugenia was a creature of habit. She wrote nightly. This is from last year." He flipped the pages with delicate care, scanning passages with swift precision before closing it again. "We need the most recent. She would not have kept it here." Oliver frowned. "If not here, then where?" Poirot rose slowly, his gaze drifting around the room with the air of a chess master studying the board. Then his eyes settled on the tall wardrobe in the corner. He approached it, opened the door, and examined the garments hanging inside. Expensive dresses, shawls, coats, nothing unusual. But Poirot reached upward, pressing his hand against the panel above the closet rod. A soft click emerged. Lydia gasped. "A compartment?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A woman who feels unsafe hides her thoughts where only she can reach them." He pressed again. The false panels slid forward, revealing a narrow recess. Inside were two journals bound in dark blue leather and a sealed envelope with Lady Eugenia's distinctive hand on the front. Poirot removed them all with care, holding the envelope last. "Voilà," he whispered. "The voice of the dead." Beatrice stepped forward, her hands trembling. "What does it say?" Poirot held up a finger. "Patience." He broke the seal delicately and unfolded the paper. His eyes moved swiftly across the page, his brow tightening with each line. When he reached the end, he exhaled deeply, folding the letter once more. Beatrice's voice quivered. "Monsieur Poirot, please." Poirot turned to her, his expression grave. "Your grandmother understood she was in danger. She wrote it plainly. She believed someone close to her sought to manipulate her, financially, emotionally, and ultimately in matters of inheritance." Beatrice staggered, sinking onto a nearby chair. "Manipulate? Who would dare?" Oliver's voice was strained. "It must be Graves. He was always alone with her." Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, she mentions the doctor only in passing. She believed he was frightened, not threatening." He looked at Oliver. "But she was very clear about one thing. Someone in this house wanted control of Blackwater Mill. Someone who pressed her to sell, then to invest, then to sign documents she had not read. Someone whose charm hid deeper intentions." Oliver stiffened. "Poirot, don't you dare insinuate I I insinuate nothing, monsieur, Poirot said calmly. I read her words. Lydia's eyes widened. But what of the voices she heard? The footsteps? The bell that rang? Poirot lifted his hand thoughtfully. Those were crafted, mademoiselle, designed to unsettle her, to weaken her resolve. A frightened mind is easily guided, Beatrice whispered. She thought the house itself was turning against her. Poirot softened his tone. But it was not the house, dear lady. It was someone who knew its shadows well. Hartridge crossed his arms. So the manipulation, the staged hauntings? It was all part of someone's plan? Poirot nodded. Someone who wished to make Lady Eugenia question her sanity. Someone who could move unseen. Someone who could hide objects in the tower, or poison her tea, or steal her journals without detection. Beatrice trembled. But who? Who could do all that? Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he opened the first of the recent journals, scanning the entries. His expression changed subtly, tightening around the eyes, sharpening with certainty. He closed the book slowly. I know who orchestrated the hauntings, he said quietly. Who frightened Lady Eugenia, who stole the diary and hid it in the tower, who planted the poisoned herbs, and who framed the doctor. A hush fell over the room. Beatrice held her breath. Oliver clenched his jaw. Lydia's face drained of colour. Poirot spoke the next words with quiet precision. The culprit is someone who appears meek, someone unnoticed, someone who moves through this house like a whisper. His gaze turned, deliberate and slow, until it rested on one trembling figure near the doorway. Poirot bowed his head slightly. And now, mademoiselle, the moment has come to speak of the truth you have been hiding. Lydia stood frozen in the doorway, her hands pressed against her skirts as though trying to hold herself upright. Her breath trembled in shallow bursts, and her gaze darted between Poirot, Beatrice, and the journals he now held. The room seemed to shrink around her, its heavy drapes and shadowed corners closing in like silent spectators awaiting her confession. But she said nothing. Not yet. Poirot stepped toward her with gentle deliberation, his voice soft, almost sorrowful. Mademoiselle Lydia, you have tried very hard to remain invisible, the quiet companion, the meek observer, but in a house filled with bold personalities, it is often the quietest who pass most unseen, too unseen. Lydia shook her head weakly. You're mistaken. I never meant— No, Poirot interrupted gently. You never meant to be noticed. That is very different. He turned slightly, addressing the others without looking away from her. Lady Eugenia wrote of a presence, a shadow that moved softly, that lingered outside her door. Not a man's heavy tread, a lighter step, a careful one, a deliberate one. Beatrice stared at Lydia as though seeing her for the first time. Lydia? But why would you frighten her? You adored her. Lydia flinched. I did. I admired her. I served her faithfully. Poirot nodded. Yes, and she trusted you. You were allowed access to her tea, her rooms, her papers. You brought her comfort. You soothed her. And yet at the same time you positioned yourself to observe every private fear she had. Hartridge stepped forward. Poirot, are you saying she staged those hauntings? The footsteps? The bell? Indeed, Poirot said softly. It required subtlety, patience, someone who knew the house intimately, someone who could slip into unused rooms, hide beneath staircases, create small disturbances that would prey on an older woman's anxieties. Oliver exhaled sharply. But what motive could she possibly have? Poirot's eyes darkened. Ambition, desperation, and a secret she hoped would remain hidden. Lydia's knees buckled slightly, and she grasped the bedpost to steady herself. "I didn't kill her," she whispered. "I didn't touch her. I would never—" "Never—" Poirot approached her slowly, his gaze tender. "Perhaps. But the web of deceit you wove, this contributed to her death, and the truth you wished to bury, that is the heart of it." Beatrice stepped closer, her voice trembling. "What truth?" Lydia squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I didn't want this to happen. I tried to keep it quiet. I tried to make her see reason." Poirot raised the journal in his hand. "Lady Eugenia discovered your secret. It is here, and here." He held up the sealed envelope. "She learned it only days before her death. She confronted you, and though you did not strike her, your actions set in motion everything that followed." Beatrice looked between them in horror. "What secret?" Poirot drew a long breath. "Lydia Moore is not Lydia Moore. Her real name is Lydia Harland, and her family once owned a portion of the marshland on which Blackwater Mill was built, land her father sold to Lady Eugenia for a pittance during a time of desperation." Oliver blinked. "What does that matter?" "It matters," Poirot replied, "because Lydia believed her family was wronged, that the mill should have been hers, that the estate ruined her father's life. And when she came into Lady Eugenia's service, she saw an opportunity, not for violence, but for influence, for control, for inheritance." Lydia sobbed quietly. "She had so much, and we had nothing. The marshlands were everything my father owned, and she took them. She said it was business, but it destroyed him." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Lydia, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have told her," Lydia cried, "and she would have dismissed me, cast me out. I needed time to make her see that the mill should pass to those who deserved it, time to weaken her certainty, time to—" Poirot tilted his head, "time to frighten her into doubt." Lydia nodded miserably. "But I never expected her to collapse, never expected she was truly ill. When she grew worse, I panicked. I staged the noises to distract her, so she would come to rely on me, so she would listen. But then Dr. Graves noticed her decline and grew suspicious. He searched her documents, and I feared he would discover what she wrote about me." Hartridge frowned deeply. "So you staged hauntings, manipulated her fears, and framed Graves to draw suspicion away from yourself?" Lydia sank onto the edge of the bed, shaking. "He was always watching her, always asking questions. It was so easy to make it look like he—"
"Wanted control over her health." Poirot's voice softened further. "And the diary you hid in the tower? You feared that if Beatrice read it, she would learn the truth, that her beloved companion had been wearing a mask." Beatrice covered her mouth. "Lydia, the gloves, the herbs. Tell me they weren't yours." Lydia looked up with a despairing expression. "The gloves were mine. I handled the teacup that night. But I swear to you, the mixture in her tea was only to calm her. I never intended harm. She must have been far weaker than the doctor knew." Poirot nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is true. Poison is not always needed to end a life. Fear, manipulation, exhaustion, these too can kill." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Lydia whispered, "I never meant for her to die. I only wanted what my family lost." Poirot stepped back, folding the journals under his arm. "Intent does not erase consequence, mademoiselle. Lady Eugenia died believing herself haunted by ghosts, but she was haunted by your grief, your secrecy, your ambition." Beatrice sobbed softly. Hartridge moved to arrest Lydia, but Poirot lifted a hand. "Gently, Inspector. She's not a murderer in the conventional sense, but she is responsible." Lydia rose with trembling dignity. "I will go with you. I will not run like Dr. Graves." Poirot's gaze turned distant. Ah, yes, the doctor. He too has a truth yet to reveal, and before this night ends, we must find him. He turned toward the door, his voice quiet but firm. For the final shadow over Blackwater Mill has not yet lifted. The marshland swallowed sound as Poirot stepped outside, lantern in hand, the fog coiling around his polished shoes as though the earth itself sought to hold him back. The constables scattered earlier had returned empty-handed, reporting no sign of Dr. Graves near the immediate grounds. Yet Poirot's instincts, careful, precise, honed over a lifetime, told him the doctor had not fled far. He followed a narrow trail leading toward the old mill outbuilding, a structure half devoured by moss, its roof sagging, its stone walls slick with damp. A faint glimmer of lantern light flickered through a crack beneath the door. Poirot paused, then rapped gently. "Dr. Graves," he called, in a calm, steady tone. "Your hiding place is not as hidden as you hoped." Inside, there was a sharp intake of breath, then footsteps, wary, hesitant. The door creaked open just enough to reveal the doctor's pale, sweat-slicked face. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered shakily. "They'll blame me. They already do." Poirot stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Sit, mon ami. You are trembling so much you shall collapse before the truth can be spoken." Graves sank onto an overturned crate, his hands buried in his hair. "I didn't kill her, I swear it." Poirot regarded him with gentle scrutiny. "I know. You are not a murderer, but you have held back truths, and half-truths can strangle a man as tightly as any rope." Graves looked up, desperate. "I tried to help her. She confided things to me. Confusion, fear, pain, but there was more. Something she made me promise never to reveal." Poirot nodded slowly. "Her illness?" The doctor froze. Poirot continued softly. "Her heart was failing long before the commotion began. She hid it well, pride, perhaps, or fear that someone might use her weakness against her." Graves swallowed hard. "She made me swear not to tell Beatrice. She didn't want pity. She didn't want anyone interfering with her decisions about the estate." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "she was preparing drastic changes to her will. And you knew." The doctor's voice cracked. "Yes, and I knew what it would do to the family. I tried to stop her from overexerting herself, but her stubbornness, her pride, it killed her more surely than poison." Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder. "You fled because guilt gnawed at you, not guilt of murder, but of failing to protect her." Graves nodded miserably. "I thought if they found that letter I took, that they would believe I forged it. I only wanted to read it, to understand her intentions. When Oliver walked in, I panicked." Poirot stood and looked toward the fog-shrouded mill. "Come, Doctor. The time has come to face the truth, not alone, but among those who seek it." When they returned to the manor, the household had gathered in the drawing-room. Lydia sat quietly between two constables, her expression hollow, resigned. Beatrice turned sharply at the sight of the doctor, but Poirot raised a calming hand. "Mes amis," he began, stepping into the center of the room with quiet authority. "The shadows within Blackwater Mill have obscured much, but now, at last, we shall lift them." He gestured toward Lydia. This young woman wove illusions, sounds, movements, signs, to unsettle Lady Eugenia. She wished to reclaim the legacy her family believed stolen. But she did not intend death. Lydia bowed her head. Tears glistened, but she did not speak. Poirot turned to Dr. Graves. The doctor hid her illness, tried to steal clarity from her secrets, and fled in fear. But fear is not proof of murder. Then slowly, Poirot looked toward Oliver Renwick, who stiffened. "Yet one truth remains," Poirot said softly. "Lady Eugenia believed someone was pressuring her, someone urging her to sell the mill, to shift investments, to sign documents without scrutiny." Oliver's face darkened. "We've already established Lydia was behind the hauntings. What more do you want?" Poirot approached him with slow, precise steps. "Ah, but the hauntings were only part of the plan. Someone else sought to use Lady Eugenia's frailty to gain financial advantage. Someone who pressured her, daily, persistently, to choose a particular course for the mill."
Oliver's composure faltered. "You have no proof." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But I do. In the revised will, her notes show she intended to remove you from all investment control, and here," he held up the charred scrap from the fireplace, "is the remnant of a draft letter ending your business involvement entirely." Beatrice gasped. Oliver's facade cracked. She misunderstood my intentions. I only wanted—" "Profit," Poirot finished, "and influence. When she resisted, you grew desperate." Oliver lunged forward as though to protest, but constables seized him. His struggle confirmed everything. Poirot exhaled gently. "You sought to manipulate her mind, her fear. You conspired with Lydia's unknowing actions, using the confusion she caused to push Lady Eugenia towards signing away her authority. But fate intervened. Her failing heart, stressed by fear and strain, ended her life before you could seal your scheme." Silence fell. Beatrice wept quietly, mourning not only her grandmother, but the trust shattered within her home. Finally, Poirot turned to the room with a soft, reflective gaze. "In the end, mes amis, the death of Lady Eugenia was not the work of one wicked mind, but the collision of grief, ambition, fear, and pride, human nature at its most fragile." He bowed his head. "The ghosts of Blackwater Mill were not spirits, but secrets." "And now, at last, they may rest," Beatrice whispered. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot straightened his moustache delicately. "It is always the duty of Hercule Poirot to restore order where chaos seeks to reign." And with that, the great detective prepared to depart the haunted marshes, leaving behind a house forever changed and a mystery finally laid to rest.